Thank you all again for joining us for another one of our Farm Talk as we start wrapping up the peak season and get moving into maybe not vacations, but a little bit of downtime. Um, Thank you once again for having our farmers here with us, Ray and Rob. And so today I had been thinking that we could talk a little bit more about um, planning for I guess how to describe this, planning for soil improvements for the longevity. How do you make decisions about not just what you're planting in this season, but knowing how to plant in such a way that you're going to be setting yourself up for success in future seasons, and doing that in a way that is going to support the long term productivity of your production area. We've discussed a lot about cover crops previously, and I want to know if maybe Ray or Rob, either of you had something you wanted to share about succession planting, figuring out how to make sure that your soils are being taken care of, especially going into the winter when it's not being farmed for your cash crops. So, what are the steps that you start taking now as we start winding down the season to maintain the sustainability?
Hey, Jordan, I might
Yes.
as well, I might as well start.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
What I'm doing right now is waiting for the green tomato to turn red. Oh, yes, I don't know whether we're going to have a warm, nice fall or not. You never know. Um, some years we've had frost by this state, and other years we get away without frost till middle of October. But I'm just hoping that we keep up our 90-degree weather for at least 4 more weeks. I may be stretching it. Rob, jump in there. Do you want 4 more weeks to try to get some production?
Absolutely. Um, 85 to 90 would be ideal. On one side we have the vegetable production, on the other side we have the hay and the cows, and continued hot with no water in the pastures in the fall is stressful to the plants and to that soil. But as far as our vegetable production, I would just really hope, with the heat we had and the cold spring, our market stand is finally looking like it normally looks in late July and early August. So our full production is roughly 3 weeks, 4 weeks behind. So I would love to have some additional time. That would be marvelous. Absolutely marvelous.
Well, you still have crops for producing, flowering, etc.
Absolutely. Yep. Our tomatoes, we're going to get another big harvest of slicers and cherry tomatoes this week. Our peppers are really coming on. There's a lot of new fruit set, and eventually those plants will freeze. You can only do so much to keep them from freezing. And then you just, you get ready for the next phase. It could be planting a cover crop for the fall. We've done some of that and might do that again this year. Or just taking and covering the soil so that it doesn't dry out so much in the wintertime. One of the challenges with soil preparation in the off season, in the field, you have, although it's very limited here, you have natural precipitation and you have some moisture falling on your fields. When you cover it with a hoop house, there's no natural moisture, and without some irrigation periodically in the off season, those soil microbes and organisms will completely die off and desiccate. And so it's important to maintain some level of soil moisture. Of course, you can improve on that scenario by watering cover crops in and doing some of that. But that's kind of how we're starting to look at, later in the fall when we go from production to our winter months, is having something in the soil that will either provide some green manure going back into the soil, or at least some means of providing periodic moisture, so that the living soil that we're trying to build in those high tunnels continues to, albeit it's slower and a lot of those things are dormant, but it continues to remain living. So that's a big part of it here in this climate, is keeping your soils moist. It's like watering an evergreen in January. I mean, those needles always pass a little bit of water, and trees need water once or twice over the winter months to keep the roots healthy, so that in the spring, when they come out of it, they come out of it much more vigorously. And it's the same with vegetables. It's the same with the lawn, or with pastures and hay meadows. Moisture is a big consideration.
And are you doing that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ray.
Oh, I know we've talked about cover crops before. The other option, of course, is full circle compost, and this year has not been very lucrative to provide funds to fertilize with full circle compost. He's got good stuff, but the price of it is there, and the money is just from revenue from this season is just not there to pay for that. So it looks like I'm going to have to do some cover cropping, because that is a lot cheaper for me in the hoop houses. Of course, in the field, I have signed a contract with Natural Resource Conservation to rejuvenate my fields, because I have not done anything out there for several years. And but that again does not start until spring of 25, and of course, that'll be a cover crop, basically, of material, not compost, but in the days of putting compost on everything, in the days of putting manure out there, just don't seem to be in the cards this year. Maybe I'm a lousy farmer. I don't know. If I am, fine. Not, so what? Production this year has not been such to create the revenue that I feel I need in order to pay for these things that need to be done. No question about it. I would love to put full circle compost in my hoop houses. That would be, fantastic to me. And it does not look like that is going to be in the cards for the 24 into 25 season. So that's
Do
kind of
either
where.
of you compost on site?
Pardon?
Do either of you compost on site, or is that just leave it to the professionals?
No, I do not have other compost on site. We do not make compost. The process requires daily attention, and I don't have the people or the ability to do that myself. We've got green waste, no question about that. It's been the year of the weed. We have weeded and weeded and weeded. And we're still, I finally quit weeding. I just had to. There was, the plants were working on their own. And I thought, well, whatever happens, happens. Because I just don't have the hours to get out there in 105-degree temperature and weed anymore. So I'm a tired farmer.
Hey Ray, could you describe a little bit more about the contract you have with NRCS? I don't know what you're talking about, but it sounds like they are paying you or something to have a field go fallow, or extrapolate on that, please.
I would love to. NRCS has a conservation program for the small farmer, and we're talking about the urban, actually going into the urban farmer. And I'm not sure where I sit there. I'm on the borderline of both, but they have money. That's nice, and they're willing to spend it. And so what we're doing this year is we're doing bee habitat with wildflowers and the blocks with the straws in it for wild bees to generate more bees. And we're also doing a cover crop, and this is a 5-year program. And cover crop this first year will be vetch and vetch and triticale, can't pronounce it correctly, out there. And then we'll change that over that 5-year period of time, using different things. And they have said
How big is it?
how big?
Yes.
They're gonna do all 2.5 acres here.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and they're putting the dollars with it this time, which is really nice. I think I'll be able to afford the water bill, and that's monumental.
Right.
So that's a real plus. And seeing I have not been able to, put the manure out there like I used to, or spread all compost everywhere. Greg, I still love you. I'll buy compost as soon as I get some cash, but but not this year. Does that explain a little bit about the NRCS program?
Yeah, that was great. So I'm just going to Google it because we've done a little bit of that. Our plot that we are doing is not as big as that. And I think Lindsay only wanted to do it for a year, but I just think that might be worth exploring, seeing if we could get financial remuneration for, not growing in there. Basically, we got a soil report from Chuck Shumbra under Understanding Ag that the soil was really degraded and had tons of not tons, but just, problems with the root structures and things. And so that was the reasoning behind doing it. But I wonder if Lindsay knew that, you could potentially get a little bit of money. I don't know if she'd want to sign up for 5 years and all that. So, but it's good to know about. I'm learning stuff from you guys and then sharing it with Lindsay.
And so I dropped that FAQ that the NRCS, so that's the Natural Resources Conservation Service, part of USDA. They have a number of programs. So that link in the chat is to how to apply for the variety of conservation programs. And essentially what that is they will pay to help farmers take those sort of beneficial steps for soil health, pollinator cell health, wildlife improvement. And what's interesting is a lot of those are possible to do in sort of the, not obviously the cover cropping, but things like bee improvements or pollinator health. It can be done in kind of the margins where it's in between your productive area, and they will still support that to kind of get beneficial use out of land that otherwise might not be in production. Anna, yeah, question?
So yes, I do have a question. Ray, you were talking about how you're waiting for your tomatoes to ripen, and just talking to a bunch of the local gardeners around here and stuff, it's been such a challenging year because our weather has been kind of all over the place. I know that on our property, both last week on Sunday and Monday, we were below freezing. So I have frost damage everywhere. But back to my question, with waiting for your tomatoes to ripen and stuff, can you put out some of that cover crop seed while you're waiting, or do you have to wait?
Oh, no, I have to wait because I have to get all the old residue out. Like tomatoes, and I don't want that residue put back into the soil, simply because I'm a believer that it carries more problems in later years, the microbes that it creates. And so I have to get the tomatoes out. Now, I will give you a suggestion on how to get your tomatoes to ripen. Ah, you're waiting for this one, aren't you? Okay. It may be an old wives' tale or not. I have no idea, but it works for me. I take a burlap sack, get it wet, and I go out and I beat my tomato vines with the wet burlap sack. Sometimes I use some offensive language along with it. Yeah. So, but that's what I do. So that's just my method, and it seems to work. What it does is it shocks the vines into saying, "Hey, get with it," and go. Other people I know trim their vines, and that is also stimulates them. But my frustration level gets so high sometimes that the wet burlap sack is just fantastic for that frustration level. It really takes it out.
I can add to that a little bit. That's just too funny. I'll have to share that with Daniel when I get off the program. The tomato behaves in this climate like an annual plant. And what any annual will do, whether it's flowers, grasses, tomato plants, peppers, when they're under stress and they think they're going to die, they're going to try and produce seeds so they can reproduce before they do. So, whacking them with a burlap sack, using a hedge trimmer to trim the tips off the branches, cutting back a little bit on the water, or even in the case of you having some frost damage, that's going to stimulate the plant that remains to try to make some mature fruit, which is their seed, prior to their dying. So some means of introducing stress into that plant's life will hasten that ripening process for sure.
And the burlap sack technique also has the benefit of being stress relief for you.
Absolutely.
That's great. Do we have any other questions from the group, Kyle or Darylyn?
No, I'm good.
Nope.
Great. So back kind of to the original discussion, we talked about frost damage. when you're seeing those first signs of cooler temperatures come in, what sort of steps are you taking to, protect the plants, kind of change those microclimates, or is it sort of the thing where, the weather comes and what has grown will grow and so far?
Well, one of the things that we do growing in high tunnels, and we're doing it even now, the daylight period is shorter, the nights are longer and cooler. The angle of the sun is noticeably different than the peak season. So we've started taking off some of our shade cloth to allow more solar energy to get into the high tunnels. You have to be careful still to moderate the temperature, not let them get too hot. We also will go out at night. We've been down one night into the high 30s. We're not as cold as where it's at Anna's, but those high 30s, low 40s, mid 40s, even something like basil, it really does not like it when it's less than 50 degrees. And so we start going out now in the evenings with 1 or 2 hours of daylight left, shutting up the high tunnels, gathering some of that heat into the plants and into the ground so that they stay a little warmer, a little longer, and it buffers that overnight temperature. And then in the morning, we'll go out when they get up to somewhere in the 80s usually, and we'll open that up. If you forget, it can get really hot and humid in there, and then you have other issues going on. Those are some of the things we're doing now with the slight changes. And then as it gets colder, it's pretty easy in the spring when the plants are small to use wire hoops and put some row cover over your tomatoes or peppers or whatever it is you have planted. But once those plants get up 3, 4, 8 feet tall, however you're talking, it's really hard to get row cover over that. And so we try to just store as much heat as we can in the daytime, or pin the row cover up onto the trellising as high as we can get it. Sometimes you'll still lose a portion of the tops of your plants that you can't get covered. There's a lot of little things that you could do, but largely in the high tunnel anyway, it's trying to maximize the amount of available solar energy.
What's the difference between a high tunnel, a greenhouse, and a hoop house?
Well, a high tunnel and a hoop house are pretty much the same thing. A greenhouse generally it's inferred that there's some additional heating or cooling so that you're not just providing season extension and protection from what's outside, but you're actually modifying the climate inside. And that's generally what would be. There's people who go both ways, but that's generally what a greenhouse would be, is where you have ventilation, heating, cooling to try and maintain a steady, optimal environment. And a high tunnel or a hoop house are pretty much the same, and they're more than a form of season extension. I mean, they do extend the season, spring and fall, but in a manual manner, they'll give you a lot of options to make slight modifications to the climate inside just by opening, closing, putting on shade cloth. But that's generally the difference, Jolene.
Thanks. I thought that was the case, but it just seems like high tunnel is such a different word than hoop house. And I kind of envisioned it being like something that you dug into the ground for or something. So.
Gotcha. Well, and there used to be the term, and they don't, well, at least I haven't heard it in a while. There's high tunnels and low tunnels. And a low tunnel would be like a 8 or 10 foot piece of conduit built into a hoop. And then you put row cover over that or clear plastic over that. So you can actually do low tunnels within high tunnels to add to that season extension. by covering up what's inside your high tunnels or your hoop houses. And you could do the same thing in a greenhouse if you're trying to reduce your heating costs or for any number of reasons, really pest control. But a low tunnel's like a single row basically, and a high tunnel is or a hoop house is big enough to accommodate multiple rows.
Okay, that might be where we're at. And then talking about season extension, are there like, how do you guys make it through the winter? You know, we have a staff of 3 people this year and we absolutely love them and we want to be able to continue to pay them, but it's tricky obviously because we just don't have the same demands and income and all the things. Are there some like ideas or quick tips or like suggestions as to how to like go from, you know, kind of your classic Nevada seasonal farm to having a bit of season extension? We do have one big hoop house and we have year-round water, which was an issue, and that, but it's not for the entirety of the farm. But you know, I'm just kind of trying to help us go in that direction because it's not really a sustainable operation. I feel like if you have to worry about laying off your best employees and then wondering if they're going to come back, and you know, it's kind of, see it as like a system, right? So if the employees and the people who are working for you can't, you know, provide for themselves year round, then how, you know, then we're not doing a good job on the farm, or then the farm isn't sustainable. You know what I mean?
Jolene, your winter time, send them up to the ski slopes. That's vacation time.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've done. I mean, Lindsay, you know, last year was a little different, but the years prior, she's gone on, you know, 4 to 6 week vacations and spent the other 4 to 6 weeks writing grants and things. But we have, you know, it's just it's not even a complaint because the people that we, you know, are working with aren't really even that kind of people that will complain, but they just, you know, there's kind of, it's a hard thing to feel like we're doing the things as an employer that we need to do in order to retain the good employees that we have. You know, I mean, it's a good problem, right? But just with these extremes and temperatures and things, it's just like, I don't know, just feels kind of hard.
Well, Jolene, there's also planning time.
Yeah.
Which and ordering, looking at all the catalogs to see what seed you want to get from who and the best price. In those winter months, probably from Thanksgiving till Valentine's Day anyway. Kind of judging that'd be about the time that would be spent in that planning phase. And it's very important because if you don't watch your dollars and cents getting your product, you know, that's another story. You can't just buy whatever you want whenever. I know sometimes the funds are there, but it makes sense to take and really look at it seriously and do the planning and backup for your planning, because whatever you order, you're going to have some backup seed for that. We found out this year that our seedlings, our first planting of seedlings, did not grow. They just, and I had to do a second planting of seedlings in order to get any seedlings for the sale in Reno. And never ever have I had to do that before. But again, it's called backup. And if I had, you know, planned on that ahead of time, I wouldn't be, you know, running around like a chicken with my head cut off in February trying to find seed, just because it didn't germinate. You know, those are problems of that you have to face as a farmer. And so that winter time is very, very useful time, I think. We tried to grow, I think, 2 years, through the winter, doing, cold weather crops. And we found that it was not the thing to do because you did not have your sunlight. It just was not good to us, and so we learned the hard way on that, and learned, use those months to do something productive.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's good advice. Thank you.
I would agree with Ray on that. And in fact, I remember Ray saying years ago, I mean, it's not often that we get down into the single digit and below zero range, but when we do, it's frequently for a prolonged period of time. And from like the first week of December through the month of January, even the first week of February, there's a pretty good probability that we're going to see a period of cold weather that, unless you're able to provide heat, is going to destroy whatever you have. I mean, when it gets down to zero, you can't cover stuff enough. And the edges of your hoop houses, the ground freezes inside, and it becomes really difficult to grow in December and January. So when we try to produce and extend our season in the spring and fall, part of it is crop selection. You want things, whole crops, lettuces, spinaches, things that are going to do well up until around Thanksgiving, and then things that will germinate when the soil is thawed, and you can get your soil and air temperature up in February-ish. It's hard to get stuff to germinate in the soil in December or January. And so that's kind of that 2.5 months between Thanksgiving and President's Day-ish. We spend a lot of time, as Ray was saying, planning. We start our seedlings in January so that we can get an early start when the outside temperatures are right. We fix a lot of equipment. We don't till very much, but it doesn't matter how much your tiller costs. Ours was used, but in fact, it was the university's. But tillers break, equipment breaks, shovel handles need sanded and linseed oiled. There's a lot of things that can be done. You can build infrastructure. There's a lot of things that can be done during those winter months, and that are restful and not as stressful. And because I think, at least our approach, and I know there are people who grow all year round, and it takes a lot of fossil fuel to do that, and that doesn't appeal to me from that perspective. But the annual cycle that we see in our region with a spring, summer, fall, and winter provides a nice opportunity for resting during those shorter days of the winter months. And when it's dark and cold outside, it's a good time to come in and do something else, or maybe get some sleep that you didn't get from April through October. And so we try and have a natural cycle that really parallels that of the world that we live in.
I can throw another suggestion out there, just because it's come up in a couple of the different meetings I've sat through. And I know that Reno Food Systems grows some things that aren't necessarily what you find at a grocery store. And so maybe what they could do with those employees is have them researching multiple recipes of, I mean, I eat Swiss chard all the time, but it's one of those crops that grows pretty well here, but a lot of people are like, what is this? What do you do with it? I have no clue how to use it. So maybe coming up with, those things that you can introduce to the people that are around the farm. And then I think they're also close to different schools and stuff. So coming up with fun ways to introduce it maybe to the younger generations could be another thing that those employees could kind of do as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, I know Swiss chard definitely will grow, and I also like it. So, yeah, the market developed for it, then maybe you could find a space to plant it. Ray, when you were talking about you did a couple years trying to grow through winter. Can you talk a little more about the varieties that you were using and what was it? The growth issue? Were they weren't productive, or there wasn't the market for them?
Okay, we looked at cold weather crops only to try to grow. And let's see, well, your lettuce and all of those greens are in that category. Carrots are in that category. Radishes, uh, turnips, even beets were in that category. And what we found was we could get germination because we get them in the ground about the 1st of November for them to germinate and come up. And then they'd sit there at about 2 inches tall and just look at you all winter long. And and that gets old in a hurry. And then come spring, they did one of two things, depending on whether we had a warm spring or a cold spring. If it was a warm spring, uh, your greens would flower on you and be gone. That type of thing. So so you'd lose what you had sat there and watched all winter. That's discouraging. Uh, you know, we talk about hoop houses and greenhouses, and I have a daughter that desperately wants a hoop house that acts like a greenhouse. And I keep trying to tell her they are different, their purposes are different, and to have a greenhouse, you could grow year round in there because that's that way it's set up for that. But she just continues to want both out of the hoop house. So we'll see. She wants to do a hoop house with NRCS and use the panels on it instead of fabric, and try to go that way and see if she does any better. And I'm thinking about it, and I really don't think she's going to gain that much. The degrees, the cold is still going to go through those panels. Uh, that's the way it is. And the greenhouse has heating and cooling and a cement floor. It's a permanent structure. A hoop house, my definition, is a temporary agricultural structure that you grow in the dirt in it to and you get to extend your seasons, spring and fall. And of course the greenhouse is different. So I don't know if I answered your question or just gave you a
No,
lot.
yeah, I think so. I So definitely, I have seen, you know, all sorts of those creative approaches trying to utilize the microclimate. So, you know, finding part of your property that's southern exposed that maybe has a berm behind it, something that protects it from the wind. So when you were designing and you know planning that from the beginning, how much did that you know the site characteristics of where you're farming go into where you place those hoop houses, where you place crops within them? I know Robbie said the edges get colder, so obviously you're thinking about that when you're making those decisions. But anything in terms of those kind of more structural decisions that you made to utilize your space most, you know, expand those seasons the most, and utilize the characteristics of the land that you got.
Okay, Jordan, in our location here, we situate our hoop houses east and west. So we get the sun coming up in the morning, full on the south side of the hoop house all day, and going down on the west side at night. That's our method anyway, for our particular location. I don't know what other people do in other locations, whether they get that serious about it or not. But you know, I can fully see and feel that sun when it comes up on, you know, in the east, it hits that end of the hoop house and starts to heat. And if you're standing there, or if you stand on the west end, the temperature is different. It is here for our location. I don't know about Rob. How about it, Rob? Do you have any insight on that?
I do, and I tend to agree with you. Although of our 16 tunnels, only one of them is oriented east-west, and that's because of the way our lot was situated, and and because of wind and trying to establish kind of a. We started out with them around the edge to protect the interior of the garden from the wind, and it worked really well for that, honestly. And so we tried to use them for that. But there is Jordan, specifically related to your question, and I'd have to look for them to find them. Years ago, there was a permaculturist, Steve Moore, did some teaching through the Specialty Crop Institute. He did a presentation down in Urington at the Jeannie Dini Cultural Center, and he also spoke at the Small Farm Conference. And he was very set on the East-West, and he had data that showed sun angles and related to latitude, and then he would also adjust the spacing between hoop houses so that one never shaded the other. Our climate here where we're at in Dayton, we've just concluded that it's more important to have something over the ground we're growing in. So ours do shade each other. And that's early and late in the day. But the amount of space that we've protected compensates for that. And then we don't have outside areas where we have outside gardening. So there's pros and cons. But as far as thermal efficiency goes, east-west is the best way to do it. And then to make sure your spacing is such that during your primary months of growing of the year, you don't have something, it could even be a tree, but you don't have something impeding the solar energy passing into that. And that's if you're trying to absolutely maximize your solar input. But from with our wind and dry climate, there's other advantages as well that that are not affected by orientation. But as far as the ability to gather solar energy, east and west is the best way to go. Even though we only have one that's east and west.
And of course, if you were in, southern Nevada, it might be a different need there if you're trying to, regulate the temperature and the humidity in a different way.
Sure. Another consideration is the wind. We've figured out how to build our high tunnels, whether they're homemade or purchased, to withstand the wind. Our wind here, the strongest winds we get in Dayton are right out of the south. And if you have 100-footer and it's getting that full side of wind pushed up against it, it's a lot easier, or it's a lot harder on that structure than if it's pushing up against just your one end wall and you have adequate angle bracing. There's a lot of design considerations, but wind, we found, depending on the design, with the east-west that we had at our previous location, the east-west, we had a lot more wind damage because the whole side of the structure was just pummeled all the time.
A quick question, because you mentioned trees as shade, but and obviously you don't want a lot of shade, but you have to put shade cloths on. So could you maybe plant a tree where you would get shade like in the middle of the day to kind of help not need a shade cloth?
You could, and we have some that we don't use shade cloth on because of that. We had our organic inspection today. I was talking with the inspector. I've made an agreement with this particular cottonwood tree that it can stay as long as I can root prune it every year, where it comes into the couple high tunnels, because they're tremendous at removing moisture and nutrients from the soil. And roots do grow up. They grow right to the surface. If you're watering your lettuce 6 or 8 inches deep and you don't do something with those roots, there are so many roots that form in that soil, and they come from below. And so that's my agreement with the tree. He can stay, and I like the tree. I like the birds and all the creatures that are there. It's marvelous. But that's one of the, I mentioned I don't till a lot. That's one of the places, if I don't till those rows in the spring and get a good day of exercise with a broad fork, getting the roots out of that 6 to 8 inches of soil, then we get 20-30% of the production that we normally would. And but you're right, the tree provides great shade. We're able to grow greens in there all year round with the shade of that cottonwood tree, and we don't use shade cloth on that one. And then others that are shaded by smaller trees, Russian olives, for example, we can take the shade cloth off of those, like this last week, much earlier in the season than the ones that don't get any shade otherwise. Yep, trees are great, but they're not without their challenges, that's for sure. I can see I'm still up because my square is yellow. So I'll just say, like, if you're driving to Urington, and they grow a lot of feed corn in Urington, and you can see, and a lot of the ditches have been concreted, and the old cottonwood gallery that used to line 95 alternate is no longer, a lot of those trees are no longer living. But when they were, or those that are, you can see a marked difference in the height of the feed corn all the way down close to the tree there. It's just like short. or not growing at all. Alfalfa, whatever crops they're growing. So if you're driving through an area where there's a lot of cottonwoods or big mature trees, you can see the farther that crop gets from the base of the tree, the taller it gets, because that tree, you just can't compete with a tree for water and nutrients if you're a shallow rooted annual plant. So, but there's some visible examples around, you'll notice at some point.
We are coming up at the end of our hour, so wanted to check back. Anyone else trigger any questions or any comments, thoughts? We're sort of talking about, preparation for the off months, off season, making those bigger systematic changes. Becca?
So I would say mine's not necessarily for that, but we are having a rodent problem in our grow area. We have it fenced down. We have the fence a foot down underneath the ground, but they're climbing the fence and then digging their own holes inside the grow area. Other than cats or dogs, and then we don't want to use poison. What do you guys suggest?
Is it time for the Pied Piper?
It might be. We're trying to live with it and let them have the little bit that they get, but we're getting ready to plant greens and we don't want all our greens to disappear.
Okay. I guess you have to get kind of hard-hearted about the situation. And what kind of triggers it for me, because we have different things that attack our crops. Some years we have quail. It was about 12 years ago, we had quail coming in here in flocks of at least 100, where you could see black patches just moving across the field. And we had to do something about that because they just decimated everything you had out there. And I think with your your little rodents, you're going to have to get hard-hearted with them. And I don't know whether trapping is efficient for you, or and I don't believe in the poison. That has too many effects on other things that you have no control over. So I think trapping is probably the best way to go about getting rid of those rodents. And you have to go through wildlife. We made a deal with them 12 years ago that they would come to the farm and pick up our quail that we had stored in cages once a week and transport them out to Stillwater. So that's where they wanted to re-establish the quail population. And as for the rodents, I don't know what they might consider, but talking to your wildlife people about that and about them decimating your crops. You're talking about commercial crops here. We're not talking about the backyard gardener with that one squirrel that you'd like to nail with BB gun. But you have something there to that's worthwhile talking to them about and trying to come up with a plan on how to let's say not eliminate but decrease the population. An example with the quail, they have 3 to 4 hatches a year. So as for the rodents, I'm not sure how many hatches they have. You know, not hatches, but you know, the increase. But I know they can probably do more than one. And just cutting that population will help you in the long run. And it's not a situation where you will be relieved of the problem uh, by the end of September. It's going to take you a while. And this year, I have quail population that has increased to where I've got flocks of about 50 coming through, and all the babies following. And I've had to trap and transfer them down to the Carson River. Wildlife hears this, I'll probably be in jail before the next talk show, but that's the way it is.
That would be a travesty, Ray.
Yeah.
We come break
visit
you
me.
out like a squirrel.
That's my situation.
Hey Kyle, what types of rodents are you working with or dealing with?
Well, we got the standard desert rat, we have kangaroo rats, and then we also have field mice.
Okay,
Cottontails have come back really strong this fall as well.
I gotcha. You know, it's kind of like insect or plant pests, just an integrated pest management approach. Can involve a lot of things. It can be exclusion. That doesn't work for some of your climbing insects, like pack rats, or not pack rats, your kangaroo rats. We have a lot of those here. We don't plant grain in the fall anymore because they come through and harvest it all and they cache it away. And after a wet year, you see little patches of wheat coming up all through the desert, and you know where it went. And they're just doing what God made them to do, so you can't be too mad at them. And but we don't plant grain in the fall at all because they'll harvest it. They're primarily a seed harvester, but the field mice and the cottontails, they'll mow stuff down. Trapping is definitely a possibility. Cottontails are a game animal, so you would have you could get a depredation permit and you can apply for one through the Department of Wildlife to be able to take care of animals that are causing a problem with your commercial enterprise. And it's not hard to do, and we've done it for cottontails at our previous location for our hayfields. Jackrabbits are not protected, but cottontails are. Beavers in irrigation ditches, I know local producers will get a depredation permit that allows them to trap beavers outside of the trapping season. So I think it might involve a little of everything for you to get the numbers down. And we've seen it here too, quail, rodent pests. After 2 really wet years, there's a lot of plant material, there's a lot of rodents, there's a lot of predator animals that feed on the rodents, a lot of coyotes. Another thing you might look at doing if you have, and I know where you're at, but in generally, but not exactly, would maybe be some predator, some bird perches, hawk perches in and around your growing area. So you could have a hawk come sit looking over your production area, and or an owl at night. You may not ever see them, but that might be some effective things to look at too. Or
how tall should those be?
You could find that information online, but they're usually about 12 or 14 feet tall. And if you have power poles or phone lines, a lot of times they're redundant. But if you want them concentrating on your garden, you can focus them on an area by providing some of those perches in that habitat for them.
Great, fantastic advice there. I was just Googling that. Looks like, yeah, 15 to 20 feet seems like the preferred perching height. So that should work. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to stop there, we'll record this, put it up on the farm network, and then look forward to having you all back in a couple more